Good morning, everyone. All information contained herein is provided solely for educational purposes. It is not intended as a substitute for professional or legal advice. Should you decide to act upon any information contained in this presentation, you do so at your own risk. While the information posted has been verified to the best of our abilities, we cannot guarantee that there are no mistakes or errors. This is the Enviroschool program at the Louisiana Department of Environmental Quality. Today, we are presenting Understanding Asbestos and Lead. I'm Tamika Priolo, coordinator for Enviroschool, and I will be moderating today. We will be muting everyone except for the speaker. However, just as a precaution, go ahead and keep yourself muted individually as well. If you'd like to ask a question, please use the Q&A option and not the chat. Type in your questions and we will answer them at the end of each section today. Slides and a recording of this webinar will be available on the Enviroschool website. There will be a poll at the end of this webinar to provide your feedback so we can improve our sessions. So please complete before logging off. Email any comments, questions, or concerns to enviroschool@la.gov. Our speaker today is Davina Whitty. Davina is a senior environmental scientist at LDEQ and has been with the agency for 20 years. Davina started her LDEQ career as an environmental scientist in the water permitting division in our Baton Rouge headquarters office. In 2005, Davina transferred to the Southeast Regional Office to become an air inspector in the surveillance division. She's been involved with asbestos for the past 13 years and has been the lead for the past 2 years. Davina graduated from Louisiana Tech with a degree in environmental science. So Davina, please begin.
Okay, well, good morning, everybody. I'm the asbestos lead, the asbestos senior technical advisor for the state of Louisiana. And today I'm hoping to answer most, if not all, of your questions about asbestos. Today we'll be talking about what is asbestos, why should we care about it, where will we find it, who is regulated, what is regulated, when is notification required, and how do I handle, transport, and dispose of asbestos? We're going to start out really basic. What is asbestos? Asbestos is a fibrous, natural occurring mineral that is mined from the earth. It can be found throughout the world. Definition of asbestos material is asbestos or any material or product which contains more than 1% asbestos. There are two different groups. There's the serpentine and the amphibole. The difference is in their crystalline structure. Serpentine is a sheet or layered structure, and the amphibole is a chain-like or crystal structure. Types of serpentine, chrysotile is that one. It's the white asbestos. It's the one that most people are familiar with. It is the most common, especially in the construction industry. Types of amphibole, there are a few different types. Amosite is the brown, chrysotile is the blue. These are also pretty common. The others are fairly rare. So this is what chrysotile looks like. Again, this is the most common that we see, the white asbestos in construction products. And here are some of the other ones. Chrysotile, you can see on the top left, that's the blue that is also pretty common. So why do we care about asbestos? Studies and epidemiologic investigations have shown that inhalation of asbestos fibers may lead to increased risk of developing one or more diseases. The factors of developing one of these diseases is the amount of exposure, your lifestyle, and the individual susceptibility. The route of entry into the body are mainly inhalation, and sometimes ingestion can give you problems too. A latency period is 10 to 40 years. There are 3 asbestos-related diseases. asbestosis, lung cancer, and mesothelioma. Asbestosis is the fibrotic scarring of the lungs. It reduces the capacity of your lungs. Common symptom is shortness of breath. The typical latency period is 15 to 30 years. The latency period is the amount of time from the moment of exposure to the start of symptoms, meaning you can be exposed today and not even know that you have been exposed for 15 to 30 years when your symptoms start arising. And it's based on a dose-response relationship. A dose-response relationship means the higher the dose, the more severe the response. Lung cancer. Asbestos is only one of the many causes of lung cancer. We all know smoking is a high risk. The estimated increased risk from smoking is 10 times. The estimated increased risk from asbestos is 5 times. If you combine smoking and exposure to asbestos, its increased risk is over 50 times more likely to get lung cancer than a non-smoker that doesn't work with asbestos. The typical latency period is 20 to 30 years. Mesothelioma, this is the one that we hear the most about. It is a cancer of the chest cavity lining. It can also occur in the lining of the abdominal cavity. It spreads rapidly and is always fatal. And although it's the one that we hear most about, it is actually the most rare. But because it spreads rapidly and is always fatal, that's probably why we know so much about it or hear so much about it. It does not appear to have a dose-response relationship or increased risk for smokers. The typical latency period is 20 to 40 years. We also care about it because it's regulated. Asbestos was one of the first hazardous air pollutants regulated under the Air Toxic Program, also known as TSCA. The EPA regulations, they have the AHERA rule and NESHAP. The LDEQ regulations, we have Title 33, Part 3, Chapter 27, and Title 33, Part 3, Chapter 51, Subchapter M. The EPA regulations, AHERA is the Asbestos Hazard Emergency Response Act. It regulates asbestos in schools. It requires schools to have an asbestos management plan. The asbestos NESHAP is the Asbestos National Emission Standard for Hazardous Air Pollutants. It covers milling, manufacturing and fabricating, renovation and demolition of buildings, and the waste disposal and transportation. Oh, shoot, sorry. No, that's right. The LDEQ regulations, we're designated authority over the federal regulations. So we have modeled our Chapter 33 after, Title 33, Part 3, Chapter 27, after the EPA AHERA rule, but we threw in state buildings. So our Chapter 27 AHERA rule covers asbestos-containing materials in schools and state buildings. Title 33, Part 3, Chapter 51, Subchapter M is the emission standards for asbestos. This follows the federal EPA rule for the NESHAPs. What we usually look at is 5151F, and that's the emission standard for demolition, renovation, asbestos-contaminated debris activities, response actions, and major fiber releases. It covers the applicability, notification requirements, and emission control requirements. 5151J is for waste disposal for manufacturing, fabricating, demolitions, renovations, major fiber release episodes, response actions, and spraying. And I forgot to put in the ACD, the contaminated debris activities. That should be in there too. 5151P covers the training and accreditation requirements. So where will I find asbestos? Asbestos was used so prevalently because of its characteristics and property. They're extremely long, thin, flexible fibers that can easily be woven. They have a high tensile strength. They're resistant to chemical and thermal degradation, have a high electrical resistance, they're fire resistant, and they're good insulators. all good things for construction materials. EPA recognizes 3 categories of asbestos-containing building materials. That's TSI, thermal system insulation. It's the insulation used to inhibit heat transfer or prevent condensation on pipes, boilers, tanks, ducts, and various other components of hot and cold water systems and HVAC systems. You have surfacing material, that is asbestos-containing material sprayed or troweled on surfaces for acoustical, decorative, or fireproofing purposes. And then we have miscellaneous material, and that's pretty much everything else. They are largely non-friable material, such as floor tile, ceiling tile, roofing tile, and so on. Thermal, TSI, and surfacing materials are considered friable. Asbestos is used in over 3,000 commercial products. Although people think that asbestos is illegal, outlawed, can't find it, that's not true. They tried to ban asbestos in products back in the 80s. It did not work completely. So you can still buy products today containing asbestos. They don't usually say asbestos on them. They'll say chrysotile. And most people don't know that chrysotile is asbestos. And just some more of the commercial products that you can still find asbestos in. Okay, so let's talk about who is regulated. We regulate facilities. The definition of a facility is any institutional, commercial, public, industrial, or residential structure, installation, or building, any ship, and any active or inactive waste disposal or asbestos contaminated debris site. So in summary of that definition, any institutional, commercial, public, industrial, residential having greater than 4 dwelling units, installations, ships, and asbestos contaminated debris sites. So most of those, we know what most of those are, but let's talk about some that you might not know. An institutional facility is a facility operated by an organization having a governmental, educational, civic, or religious purpose, such as a school, hospital, prison, military, church, or similar establishment. An installation is any building or structure or any group of buildings or structures at a single demolition or renovation site that are part of a planned project that are under the control of the same owner or operator. ACD site, that is a site containing demolition or renovation debris that contains regulated asbestos contaminated material. So let's talk about who is not regulated. In that definition of facility, I only read part of it because the rest of it was talking about exceptions. So the residential buildings that have 4 or fewer dwelling units are exempt, except for residential structures that are intentionally demolished or renovated as part of a commercial or public project, such as urban renewal or highway right-of-way projects, are installations and are regulated. Residential structures that are intentionally burned, such as the institutional use of firefighting practice, are also regulated. Buildings or structures, or any group of buildings or structures at a single demolition or renovation site that are part of a planned project that are under the control of the same owner or operator, are regulated. This is another example of an installation. So EPA has stated that if you have a private residence, it doesn't matter who knocks it down, if it's the owner or if it's a municipality. However, if a municipality comes in and starts doing blighted properties, and they have to make sure that it's not at a single demolition site. And there is a lot of guidance on what a single demolition site is. It can be up to a block. So if a municipality starts doing blighted projects and the properties blighted properties and the homes are too close together, either physically or in time, they can't be done back to back, then if they are, they're considered an installation that would be a project or a single demolition site. So a municipality can knock down a house, but in a certain way. There's a lot of guidance on that. If that ever comes up, you can just ask us. Any structure, installation, or building that was previously subject to regulations is not excluded, regardless of its current use or function. Say if you have a commercial property and you renovate it into a residential property, it's still regulated. Or if you have a fiveplex that was regulated and you renovate it into one single dwelling, still regulated. On the flip side of that, a single home which is converted into non-residential structure is also regulated. So if you have a home that's not regulated and you start renovating it to make it a commercial business, that renovation is regulated. A single home in residential cooperative where the homes are not individually owned or regulated. An example of this would be like a trailer park where if you rent one of the trailers, or we see a lot of this with the housing authority. Let's keep going with who is not regulated. Debris from buildings that are unintentionally burned. An accidental fire is not a demolition or renovation, so it is not regulated. However, only the debris is not regulated. If there's any remaining portion of that building and you want to subsequently demolish or renovate that building, then that demo or reno is going to be regulated. You would have to remove the debris as not regulated and then start as if it's regulated. So inspection, handling, disposal, everything that comes from the subsequent demolition or renovation is regulated, fully regulated. Intentional fires are considered demolition by fire and are regulated. Again, that's intentional. You can't burn it down and say that it's burned debris and not regulated. You did it on purpose. Building debris from buildings destroyed by natural disaster. According to EPA, building debris on the ground from structures destroyed by natural forces as opposed to human activity is not subject to the asbestos NESHAP. And we follow that as well. So if you have a natural disaster, it's not a demo, reno by human activity, so it's not regulated. But again, the same with the fire, it's only the debris on the ground that's not regulated. Any remaining portion of that building that is subsequently demolished or renovated is regulated. So who else is regulated? We regulate facilities, but we also regulate people. People who work with regulated asbestos must be accredited. There are 5 asbestos accreditation disciplines. Inspectors, they inspect for the presence of asbestos. Management planners, they write management plans for schools and state buildings. Abatement project designers, they will design the projects for the abatement activity. Abatement contractor supervisor, they supervise the abatement project. Air monitors are required to be accredited as a contractor supervisor. And then the abatement workers, and they're the ones that actually conduct the abatement. All disciplines require training from a recognized asbestos training provider. There's a list that can be found on our website. Annual refreshers are required to keep continuous accreditation. Demolitions and renovations disturbing greater than 3 square linear feet of regulated material must be designed, supervised, and conducted by accredited persons. Once training is complete, proof of training along with an application and a fee must be submitted to DEQ to receive accreditation. Once the application is processed, a certificate of accreditation is issued. You are accredited upon receipt of the certificate of accreditation. Training alone is not enough. You have to be accredited. So let's talk about what is regulated. Any demolition or renovation, response action, or asbestos contaminated debris activity that disturbs regulated asbestos containing material, also referred to as RACM, if the combined amount of RACM to be stripped, removed, dislodged, cut, drilled, or similarly disturbed is at least 60 linear feet on pipes, at least 64 feet on other facility components, or at least 27 cubic feet of facility components where the length or area could not be measured previously. You will hear me refer to these as thresholds, or sometimes I'll say 60, 64, 27. A demolition is the permanent wrecking or taking out of any load supporting structural member of a facility together with any related handling operations or the intentional burning of any facility. A renovation, altering a facility components in any way, including the washing, stripping, or removal of RACM from a facility component. Again, operations in which load supporting structural members are wrecked or taken out are demolitions. Even if you don't demolish the whole building, if you're taking out a structural member, a load supporting structural member, then it's that part of it is a demolition. A response action is a method including actions during demolition or renovation that provides for removal, encapsulation, enclosure, repair, and operations and maintenance activity that protects human health and the environment from RACM. For the purpose of this webinar, anytime I say demo reno, assume that it includes response action. It's just easier to say demo reno than to list all of them. An ACDA, the handling and or disposal of asbestos contaminated debris as RACM. And we also have major fiber release episodes. These are any controlled or unintentional disturbance of ACBM which involves the falling or dislodging of more than 3 square or 3 linear feet of friable ACBM. So whether it is RACM or not depends on friability. Asbestos containing material is broken up into 3 categories when we're talking about friability. You have friable asbestos material, and that is any material containing more than 1% asbestos as determined by this method that when dry can be crumbled, pulverized, or reduced to a powder by hand pressure. And like I said before, these are TSI and surfacing material. Category 1 non-friable asbestos containing material is asbestos containing packings, gaskets, resilient floor covering, and asphalt roofing products containing more than 1% as determined by the method that when dry cannot be crumbled, pulverized, or reduced to a powder by hand pressure. Category 2 is any material excluding category 1 that when dry cannot be crumbled, pulverized, and so forth. So regulated asbestos containing material. So what is RACM? RACM is any friable asbestos material, or it's any category 1 or 2 non-friable ACM that has become friable. Or it can be category 1 and 2 non-friable ACM that has a high probability of becoming or has become crumbled, pulverized, ground, sanded, cut, abraded, or reduced to a powder by forces that have acted or are expected to act on the material in the course of the demo reno operations. Or resilient floor coverings, or the asbestos containing mastic used to attach it to the floor if that is scraped, sanded, abraded, bead blasted, so on and so forth, either by hand or mechanical equipment. So how do you know if RACM is present? Regulated facilities must be inspected by an accredited inspector prior to demo reno and response action. An accredited inspector must thoroughly inspect the affected facility or part of the facility where the activity will occur for the presence of asbestos, including Cat 1 and Cat 2. Or you can skip the inspection and just assume that it's all rackham. And then you'll have to treat all suspect material as rackham. Inspections. The inspection must be made by an accredited asbestos inspector. For each area of the building that will be affected, the inspector must visually inspect to identify suspect ACM. They must touch all suspect ACM to determine friability. Identify all homogeneous areas of friable and non-friable suspected ACM. They can either assume that some or all of the homogeneous areas are ACM, or for each homogeneous area that is not assumed, they can collect and submit bulk samples for analysis. Samples must be analyzed for asbestos using an accredited laboratory. If suspect material is assumed to be ACM, or if sample analysis proves that it is ACM, the inspector must then assess the condition of the material to determine if it is friable or if it has a high probability of becoming friable during a demolition, renovation, or response action. ACM that is friable or has a high probability of becoming friable, as determined by the accredited inspector, is rackham. And again, that's regulated asbestos containing material. Please note, you can either inspect or assume and treat all suspect material as rackham. A lot of people think that you can either inspect or just assume that it contains asbestos and then decide on your own if it's friable or non-friable. That is not what the regulation says. The regulation says inspect or assume that it's rackham. Only an accredited inspector can determine friability. So after the inspection, he or she can assume that it contains asbestos, and then he or she can say whether or not it's friable, and that's with his assessment by touching, feeling, all of that. So if a facility is demolished or renovated prior to an inspection or notification, or if the facility being demolished is structurally unsound and in danger of imminent collapse, and therefore cannot be inspected for ACM prior to demo, then all debris at the site is categorized as asbestos contaminated debris and shall be handled and disposed of as rackham. It's very important that prior to doing a demolition or renovation, you submit inspection, you do have the inspection conducted and you submit notification to DEQ, because you cannot take samples from the debris pile and you cannot segregate any materials from the debris pile. This is an ACD site that I worked. It came in as a complaint, and this is what I saw when I walked up. This was an old school, and every single piece of C&D waste in that pile is now regulated and has to be disposed of as regulated. You have to have accredited people do it, handle it, transport it, dispose of it, everything. That gets very, very expensive. We do not at this time let you take anything out of that pile if it's not a suspect material, because it is considered contaminated. We don't know what was in there before it was knocked down, so we have to assume that the demolition caused a fiber release, and now everything in that pile is contaminated with asbestos fibers. This is another site that I worked, and although it looks lovely and green, upon closer examination, it was full of C&D. Even closer, that is asbestos transite, and it was found throughout the property. What we had them do is keep digging until they found no more C&D waste, and all of that, including the soil, everything is asbestos contaminated and had to be disposed of as asbestos contaminated debris. And as you can see, this is a picture of that, where they have to dispose of it as all regulated, even all the brush and the dirt, everything. And here is an example of a renovation. This was a large hotel where they started doing demo, and it looks on the surface like that's all just cement, concrete, but when you go in, you can see they started tearing out some of the ceiling as well, and that ceiling tile very well could have been asbestos and contaminated everything in there. This is a picture of another site that I worked where they went in and just started taking out floor tile. Now in this example, because it's just floor tile and nothing else is commingled in that pile, we can let them do it. We could possibly let them test that debris for asbestos, the floor tile and the mastic on that. We did find out that it was asbestos containing, and they had to dispose of it as asbestos containing. However, because they didn't do the renovation without breaking up the floor tile, this is where it was. This was a school. So now we have a major fiber release. There's no way we would let children back into that room without it being decontaminated. So not only did they have to remove all of that floor tile, dispose of it as rackham, they also had to decontaminate this room. And also that gets very expensive. So do your inspection, know what you're dealing with, and treat it as such. Okay, so when is notification required? Notification is required if the amount of rackham to be removed during a demo reno, and again, I'm just going to start saying demo reno instead of reading the whole list. The amount of rackham to be removed during a demo reno is at or above the thresholds, and an asbestos disposal verification form, or ADVF, is required. An ADVF is a shipping document required for disposal of rackham from a demo reno site, used to track and substantiate the disposition of asbestos-containing waste material to a recognized asbestos landfill. An AAC-2A form must be submitted to the DEQ, Office of Environmental Services, to receive the ADVF. A structure that is being demolished, but an ADVF is not required because either no ACM is present, ACM is present but is not and will not become rackham, or ACM that is or will become rackham is present but will be below threshold. This is referred to as a negative declaration. An AAC-2B negative declaration form must be submitted to the Office of Environmental Services for all demolitions. You must include an inspection report. So even if there is no ACM or no rackham, you must submit notification for any demolition. Negative declarations are not required for renovations, however. Resilient floor covering that will be removed without rendering it rackham. Notification must be made to the DEQ regional office by email. This gives us an opportunity to make sure that you are not rendering it rackham. We want to have the opportunity to observe that, to make sure that it's being removed properly as to not release fibers. You must postmark or deliver at least 10 working days before asbestos activities begin for a demo reno where rackham is at or above threshold, that's the AAC-2A. At least 5 working days before a demolition begins where rackham is below threshold, that's your AAC-2B. As early as possible before, but not later than the following working day when the facility is being demoed under the order issued by a state or local government agency because the facility is structurally unsound and in danger of imminent collapse. In no case later than 4 hours after learning of an emergency incident, notified by phone, email, or voicemail the OES and the regional office responsible for inspecting the project site. After initial notification, within 5 working days, the AAC2 form shall be submitted to the Office of Environmental Services. Notify the regional office by email 3 days prior to the start of the removal of the resilient floor covering if you're removing it without rendering it Rackham. If you have a new start date, notification is required. If the activity will begin after the start date contained in the original AAC2, notice of a new start date must be submitted. Notify the regional office responsible for inspecting the project site of the new start date by email as soon as possible before the original start date. Provide the OES with a revised AAC2 of the new start date as soon as possible before and no later than the original start date. If the activity will begin on a date earlier than the original start date, submit a revised AAC2 with a new start date to the Office of Environmental Services. If you submitted a revised AAC2 and you still start on a different date that's not the revised start date, it is a violation and you will possibly get written up for it. You must notify of completion. Within 24 hours after a demo reno has ended and the work area has been cleaned, you must send notice of completion to the DEQ regional office responsible for inspecting the project site by email. Schools and state buildings require air clearance at the conclusion of any regulated action greater than 3 linear or 3 square feet. The project is not complete until the work area has been cleaned and air clearance has passed. In the case of demolition of a school or state building where occupants will not re-enter the building, clearance sampling is not required. So here's your email addresses for notifications. These are the regional asbestos admin and the Office of Environmental Services. So how do I handle, transport, and dispose of asbestos? If the amount of Rackham is at or above threshold, all Rackham must be removed prior to any activity begins that would break up, dislodge, or similarly disturb the material or preclude access to the material for subsequent removal. ACM need not be removed before demolition if it is Category 1 non-friable ACM that is not in poor condition and has a low probability that it will become Rackham. If it is on a facility component that is encased in concrete or other similarly hard material and is adequately wet whenever exposed during demolition. If it was not accessible for testing and was therefore not discovered until after demolition began, and as a result of the demolition, the material cannot be safely removed. If not removed for safety reasons, the exposed Rackham in any ACD shall be treated as ACWM and adequately wet at all times until disposal. And to expand on that, if it's exposed during the demolition and it cannot be safely removed. However, if something is exposed during demolition and it can be removed, then you have to stop. If it's above threshold, you have to send in an AAC2A, get your ADVF, and go through that whole process. If it is Category 2 non-friable ACM and has probability and the probability is low that the material will become Rackham. If greater than 3 square or 3 linear feet of Rackham will be disturbed during the demo reno, you must hire the appropriate people to conduct the work. Now notice this is 3 square or 3 linear. When I talked about the thresholds earlier, the 60, 64, 27, that refers to notification and disposal, if it's regulated or not for those. For accreditation using accredited people, it's 3 square, 3 linear feet. So even though you don't have to notify and you don't have to dispose of as Rackham, you still have to have accredited people do the work. A person contracted to perform a demo reno which disturbs Rackham or conducts an ACDA shall comply with requirements of the Louisiana State Licensing Board for contractors to perform asbestos abatement. No demolition, renovation, or response action activity that disturbs Rackham, or if there's an ACDA, shall be conducted unless at least one accredited asbestos abatement contractor supervisor is physically present. All asbestos abatement workers who are performing demolition, renovation, response action that disturbs more than 3 square or linear feet of Rackham or for an ACDA shall be accredited and supervised by an accredited asbestos contractor supervisor. If air clearance is required, the air monitor must be accredited as an asbestos abatement contractor supervisor. So on the job site, an accredited asbestos contractor supervisor must be physically present at all times during the activity. The contractor supervisor and workers directly involved in the demo reno must have proof of accreditation. That's either the DEQ issued card or the accreditation certificate and a photo ID. If we can't match the name with the accreditation certificate with a photo ID, it does not count because we don't know who you are without a photo ID. Rackham and any ACD must be adequately wetted prior to and during the demo reno and during staging and loading. Emission control methods must prevent visible emissions. Work area controls such as containment, neg air, that kind of stuff. Work area controls are defined in our regulations as OSHA. So we just refer you to the OSHA regulations. For facilities demolished where Rackham is not removed prior to demo, care must be taken to avoid crushing the ACM, and ACM must be adequately wet at all times. So don't go rolling over your pile with heavy equipment because anything that was not Rackham will be made Rackham. So don't do this. On the job site continued, Rackham must be adequately wet and contained in leak-tight, clear, transparent wrapping. These can be individual bags or a lined dumpster. Asbestos warning labels must be placed on the leak-tight, clear, transparent wrapping. Generator information labels must be placed on the wrapping prior to transporting off-site. You must store all wrapped and contained asbestos-containing waste material in a labeled, secured area away from the public where it will not be subject to disturbance or tampering until it is transported off-site. The ADVF must be kept at the site during the demolition, renovation, response action, or ACDA. Your ADVFs are only valid for 9 days. Any unused ADVFs must be returned to the OES by the owner-operator within 30 days after expiration. The work area must be cleaned upon completion. Cleaning the work area. Remove all loose debris in and adjacent to the immediate work area, whether or not it is Rackham, and encapsulate all remaining Rackham in the immediate work area when feasible with a non-white pigmented encapsulant, which is compatible with the contacted surface. After completion of a demolition activity where no load supporting structural member of the facility is left, no asbestos containing floor covering or the mastic shall remain on surfaces where the material has the potential to become Rackham. So on your slab, if you still have tile on there, if there's a possibility that will become Rackham, even by weather, it needs to be removed. So how do you transport? Asbestos containing waste material, and notice it's ACWM, not just Rackham, must be transported by an authorized solid waste transporter. ACWM in the solid waste regulation includes Rackham and non-Rackham. Vehicles used in transporting ACWM must be marked appropriately during loading and unloading. And if ACWM is transported in an open body truck, a tarp must be used to cover the load when in motion. If rackham is wrapped, not bagged, in a clear, leak-tight wrapping, the burrito wrap technique shall be used if it is transported in an open-bodied truck. Disposal. ACM must be disposed of at a recognized asbestos landfill. Rackham must be disposed of in a type 1 or type 2 RAL authorized to accept rackham. Rackham cannot be disposed of in a type 3, that's a C and D landfill. Non-rackham can be disposed of at a type 3 landfill, but you must disclose that it is non-regulated ACM. And also I would suggest that you call that landfill prior to showing up with it and make sure that they will take it. Just because they can doesn't mean they will. The ADVF is relinquished to the RAL. The RAL must verify the information on the ADVF and mail the original copy to the OES within 30 working days. A copy of the ADVF must be returned to the waste generator within 30 working days. If ACWM is stored in an alternative location prior to disposal, the location must be registered as a non-process transfer station. The ADVF always stays with the waste. This is not a good burrito wrap. This isn't a burrito wrap at all. So I just wanted to put this on here to show how not to do this. If you're unfamiliar with the burrito wrap, in that line dumpster, you would go from the back end, pull the poly over, flap one side, flap the other side, and then from the front end, flap that back and tape it so that when you're driving down the road or transporting, you limit the possibility of air getting in there and causing the tape to become loose. See, they didn't even tape it well. So in summary, you must inspect or assume, use an accredited asbestos inspector, notify using an AAC2 form. To remove, use accredited asbestos contractor and workers for rackham greater than 3 square and 3 linear feet. Transport, use an authorized solid waste transporter. If storing prior to disposal, you must store at a registered non-processing transfer station. Dispose at a recognized asbestos landfill. Now, Tamika asked me to touch on the new rule. So if you don't know, DEQ is attempting to combine Chapter 27, which is the school rule, and Chapter 51, which is the demo reno rule. I don't want to go in too specifically because we don't have a final draft yet and anything can change. But if you have any questions, I can try to answer those with you knowing that anything can change and anything that I say might not actually go in the new rule. Contacts, these are your regions, and I'm at the bottom and I am statewide. And again, I'm the technical advisor, senior for asbestos and lead. So you can call me at any time. So lead abatement and renovation, repair, and painting, that's the RRP. So again, why do we care about lead? When lead is absorbed into the body, it can cause damage to the brain and other vital organs like the kidneys, nerves, and blood. It also causes behavioral problems, learning disabilities, and so forth. Most human exposure to lead occurs through ingestion or inhalation. Children 6 years and under are most at risk from exposure because, like I said, it's ingested and kids crawl on the floor and they put their hands and other items in their mouth. They like to chew on things. And the children's bodies are still growing and they tend to absorb lead more than adults do. Health effects. Children exposed, lowered IQ, damage to the brain and nervous system, learning and behavioral difficulties, slowed growth, hearing problems, headaches, and in some extreme cases, death. Adults can suffer from reproductive problems, high blood pressure, hypertension, nerve disorders, memory and concentration problems, and muscle and joint pain. So, Title IV of the Toxic Substance Control Act, the TSCA, directs EPA to regulate lead-based paint hazards in paint, dust, and soil in child-occupied facilities and target housing. Child-occupied facility is defined as a building or portion of a building or common area other than the child's principal residence constructed prior to 1978 that meets at least one of the following criteria. A building that is visited regularly by the same child, 6 years of age or younger, on at least 2 different days within any week, provided that each day's visit lasts at least 3 hours, with the combined weekly visit lasting at least 6 hours, and the combined annual visits that last at least 60 hours. Examples of these include, but are not limited to, public and non-public schools, daycare centers, parks, playgrounds, and community centers. A building that has been determined by the department in conjunction with the state health officer to be a significant risk because of its contribution to lead poisoning or lead exposure to children who are 6 years of age or younger. And a building used as a child-occupied unit and common area in a multi-use building. So why child-occupied facilities? Because like I said, children 6 years old and under are most at risk from exposure because they crawl on the floor and they put their hands and other items into their mouths. And because their bodies are still growing and they tend to absorb lead more than adults. Target housing. Any housing constructed prior to 1978, except housing for the elderly or persons with disabilities, unless any child who is 6 years of age or under resides or is expected to reside in such housing for the elderly or persons with disabilities, or any 0-bedroom dwelling. Why target housing? The use of lead-based paint in residential homes was banned in 1978. Houses built prior to 1978 mostly contained lead. It declined over the years, but prior to 1978, you're pretty sure you're going to find some lead in that house somewhere. Excuse me. So why paint, dust, and soil? Lead paint is present in millions of homes, sometimes under layers of newer paint. Deteriorating lead-based paint, if it's peeling, chipping, chalking, cracking, damaged, or damp, is a hazard and needs immediate attention. Lead-based paint may also be a hazard when found on surfaces that children can chew on or that get a lot of wear and tear, such as windows and windowsills. A lot of times you'll see, little children looking out the window and might be kind of chewing on that windowsill, or doors and door frames and stairs, railings, banisters, and porches. They can, some, with that constant wear and tear, some of that can be pulled off into dust or paint chips. Lead in household dust results from indoor sources such as old lead-based paint on surfaces that are frequently in motion or bump or rub together, such as window frames. Deteriorating old lead-based paint on any surface, home repair activities, and tracking lead contaminated soil from outdoors into indoor environments. And again, with children, they're putting their hands in their mouth and could have dust all over that. And in soil, soil yards and playgrounds can become contaminated when exterior lead-based paint from houses or buildings flakes or peels and gets into the soil. The soil can be contaminated from past use of leaded gasoline in cars. Older playground equipment can still contain old lead-based paint and some artificial turf and playground surfaces are made from shredded rubber that might contain lead. And lead in soil can be ingested as a result of hand-to-mouth activity that is common in children, and from eating vegetables that may have taken up lead from soil in the garden. So our regulations. TSCA has a few different sets of regulations. There's the lead abatement program. That is this training and certification program for lead-based paint activities, and we'll come back to that. This requires that those engaged in lead abatement, risk assessment, and inspections in homes or child-occupied facilities built before 1978 be trained and certified in specific practices to ensure accuracy and safety. And then you have the lead renovation, repair, and painting programs, which is the RRP rule. This requires that those engaged in RRP activities in COFs and target housing be trained and certified in lead safe work practices and use these work practices to guard against lead contamination. It also requires that contractors provide information on lead safety prior to beginning work. And then there's the disclosure program. So any potential buyer or renter of a house built prior to 1978, you must disclose to them prior. Residential hazard standard and clearance levels for lead in paint, dust, and soil. And that's a set of standards for dangerous levels of lead in paint, household dust, and residential soil, as well as corresponding post-abatement clearance levels. So again, the lead-based paint abatement program provides a framework for lead abatement risk assessment and inspections, ensures that individuals conducting lead-based paint abatement risk assessment and inspection are properly trained and certified. It ensures that training programs are accredited, and ensures that these activities are conducting according to reliable, effective, and safe work practice standards. RRP requires renovators to be trained in the use of lead safe work practices, renovators and firms to be certified, providers of renovation training to be accredited, and renovators to follow specific work practice standards. So what is the difference between abatement and RRP? Abatement refers to any measure or set of measures designed to permanently eliminate a lead-based paint hazard in paint, dust, or soil. So the hazard comes first. If you're removing paint or dust that is a hazard, it is regulated. Permanent enclosure or encapsulation of lead-based paint is an abatement activity. Replacement of painted surfaces or fixtures, removal or permanent covering of soil. This includes all the preparation, cleanup, disposal, and post-abatement clearance testing activities associated with such measures. Abatement is regularly performed usually in these three circumstances. If a child has an elevated blood lead level, in housing receiving HUD financial assistance, and if state and local laws and regulations require abatements in certain situations associated with rental housing. The RRP program, on the other hand, covers any activity that disturbs paint, such as remodeling, repair, maintenance, electric work, plumbing, painting preparation, carpentry, window replacement. The program is designed to prevent the introduction of new lead hazards created by a renovation. It is not to address existing lead hazards. If there's an existing lead hazard and you are doing an abatement specifically to remove that lead hazard, that's an abatement. If you're not, that's an RRP activity. LDEQ is authorized to carry out the lead-based paint abatement program, and you'll find that in Title 33, Part 3, Chapter 28. LDEQ did not request authorization to carry out the RRP program. That program is still run by EPA. However, we do assist EPA with investigations. So Title 33, Chapter 28 is lead-based paint activities for recognition, accreditation, licensure, and standards for conducting lead-based paint activities. Applicability and exclusions. This applies to all persons and contractors who are engaged in lead-based paint activities in target housing and COFs, or child residing in a building has been identified with elevated blood lead level. This does not apply to persons who perform these activities within residential dwellings that they own, unless the residential dwelling is occupied by a person or persons other than the owner or the owner's immediate family while these activities are being performed. This does not apply to lead-based paint activities or to persons performing such activities when such activities are performed wholly within an industrial facility and are performed by persons who are subject to the training requirements of OSHA. Let's see. So lead-based paint activities are defined as the assessment of lead hazards and the planning, implementation, and inspection of abatement activities. Just keep remembering, abatement is the removal of a hazard. It contains procedures and requirements for the recognition of lead-based paint activities training providers, the accreditation of individuals, and licensures of contractors engaged in lead-based paint activities, project notifications, work practice standards, data collection and reporting of lead hazards as child occupied facilities. So some of these I'll go over in some detail. Those three at the bottom, you can look up the regs. There's way too much information in the allotted time that I have, and they're pretty straightforward as far as work practice standards and stuff like that. So they can be found. Work practice standards are in 2811, data collection 2813, and reporting of lead hazards 2815. So the training and accreditation. All disciplines require training from a recognized training provider, and I've left a link for a list of those. Annual refreshers are required to keep continuous accreditation. I want to point out that the federal rule does not require annual refreshers, but Louisiana does. So just keep that in mind. If you want to work in Louisiana, you have to have an annual refresher. There are 5 accreditation disciplines: inspectors, risk assessors, abatement supervisors, project designers, and abatement workers. Once training is complete, proof of training along with an application and fee must be submitted to the LDEQ OES to receive the accreditation. The lead inspector, risk assessor, lead project supervisor, and lead project designer disciplines must pass the applicable state examination given by the department or its proxy. So in your training course, you have to pass a test that they give you 70%. But for these specific disciplines, you'll also have to go to LDEQ and we give you our own test, and you have to also pass that one with 70%. Accreditation disciplines. Inspectors perform inspection and post-abatement clearance activities. Risk assessors perform inspection, post-abatement clearance, lead hazard screen, and risk assessment activities. Abatement supervisors may supervise abatement projects and prepare occupant protection plans and abatement reports. Supervisors may also perform all of the abatement activities that may be performed by abatement workers. Project designers prepare occupant protection plans and abatement reports for abatement projects, and abatement workers conduct abatement activities under the direction of a certified abatement supervisor. Licensure. In order to bid and or perform abatement activities, lead contractors must obtain a lead-based paint abatement and removal license from the State of Louisiana Licensing Board for Contractors. Prior to obtaining an initial renewal license, the contractor must first submit an application for approval with appropriate fees to OES and certify that the following criteria have been met. You must, for target housing and COFs, the contractor is annually accredited as a lead project supervisor. For commercial buildings and steel structures, the contractor is certified as a lead supervisor competent person in accordance with SSPC C3 or the equivalent OSHA competent person training. The contractor must have access to at least one disposal site to receive lead contaminated waste. For target housing and COFs, the contractor will incorporate the work practice standards in 2811, and for commercial buildings and steel structures, the contractor will adhere to OSHA work practice standards and SSPC requirements. Continued. The contractor must possess a worker protection and medical surveillance program consistent with requirements of OSHA and other state health officer. For target housing and COFs, an accredited lead project supervisor will be present at all times during the lead contractor's abatements. For commercial buildings and steel structures, a supervisor who is certified lead supervisor competent person in accordance with the SSPC or equivalent OSHA will be available during commercial lead abatement activities. Once the person receives a letter of approval from DEQ OES, they can then apply to the State of Louisiana Licensing Board for contractors to request a license. So you got to go through us first. Okay, abatement. Notification. The lead contractor shall notify the OES in writing of abatement activities. Notification must be made on the lead project notification form, the LPN. The LPN must be postmarked or hand delivered at least 5 working days prior to the beginning of any on-site work at the lead abatement project. The project shall not start before the start date noted on the LPN form. You must notify if the operation will stop for a day or more during the project time noted on the LPN, or if the project has been canceled or postponed. You must give 24-hour notice before the completion of the project. Now notice this says before the completion of the project. In asbestos, it's 24 hours, within 24 hours after completion. This is 24 hours before completion. There's a distinct difference there. And I think that has something to do with DEQ being able to be there for clearance sampling. Notices shall also be sent to the appropriate DEQ regional office. Notification of less than 5 working days constitutes as an emergency notification. During normal working hours, provide notification either by email to the OES and the DEQ regional office responsible for inspecting the project within 24 hours of the start of the project. I said either by email. It used to say fax. I took that out. So notify by email. After working hours, provide notification by email or voicemail to the OES and the DEQ regional office responsible for inspecting the project site within 24 hours of the start of the project. The completed notification form shall be submitted within 5 working days and shall be accompanied by the appropriate processing fees. And an amended LPN shall be submitted to the department and appropriate regional office when changes occur in completion dates, methodology, and square footage. Failure to submit a complete and accurate notification or failure to submit the appropriate fees will cause the notification to be rejected and constitutes a failure to notify. Work practice standards, these are things such as accredited persons, the project supervisor being present, a written occupant and worker protection plan, and work practices. The work practices and clearance procedures can be found in 2811E. Renovation, repair, and painting. And again, this is not our program. We chose not to get delegated in this program. EPA still runs this, but I can give you some information on that. Notification requirements. Notification is not required to DEQ for RRP. It's not required at all. However, pre-renovation education requirements are required. You must distribute EPA's lead pamphlet, and you can get that pamphlet at that link right there. You must post informational signs, obtain confirmation of receipts of the lead pamphlet. So when you give these out, make sure you have a confirmation of receipt so they can't come back on you later and say that they didn't know. And retain all your records for 3 years. Training and certification requirements. All firms must be certified. All renovators must be trained. So for firms performing renovations must ensure that all individuals performing activities that disturb painted surfaces on behalf of the firm are either certified renovators or have been trained by a certified renovator. A certified renovator is assigned to each renovation and performs all the certified renovator responsibilities. All renovations performed by the firm are performed in accordance with the work practice standards of the RRP program. Pre-renovation education and lead pamphlet distribution requirements are performed and ensure that program's record-keeping requirements are met. Certified renovator responsibilities. Certified renovators must provide on-the-job training to other workers who aren't already certified renovator on lead safe work practices to be used in performing their assigned tasks. They must physically be present at the work site when warning signs are posted, while the work area containment is being established, and while the work area cleaning is performed. Must regularly direct work being performed by other individuals to ensure that the work practices are being followed, including maintaining the integrity of containment barriers and ensuring that dust or debris does not spread beyond the work area. The renovator must also use an EPA recognized test kit or collect paint chip samples to determine whether components affected by the renovation contain lead-based paint, or you must assume that lead-based paint is present if you opt not to do the testing. The certified renovator must be available either on-site or by telephone at all times while the renovations are being conducted. You must perform job project cleaning verification, must have with you at the work site copies of initial course completion certificate and most recent refresher course completion certificate, and prepare the required records. Lead safe work practices requirements must be followed. Examples include work area containment to prevent dust and debris from leaving the work area, prohibition of certain work practices like open flame burning and use of power tools without HEPA exhaust, and thorough cleanup followed by verification procedures. EPA has a great site for this, for the work practice controls. I've left a link right there. It covers a lot of information, and it's easy to read. But again, it's too much information to put in here. So if you want more information on work practice controls, I would definitely recommend this page. For more information on the RRP program, on our website, you can find an EPA PowerPoint presentation titled Overview of the EPA Lead-Based Paint Renovation, Repair, and Painting Rule. And that is the link right there for more information on that.